Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Byrne, and I am the Executive Director of Freep Film Festival. And I'm here tonight to welcome you to Freep Film Festival's conversation about Sarah Elizabeth Ray, Detroit's Other Rosa Parks. This is a short documentary that's right now you can watch it on freep.com or after this conversation if you're coming in late. Just a reminder that it's just a little less than 5 minutes. So even if you wanted to jump out right now and come back and enjoy this conversation, you are welcome to. We expect to go, 45 minutes or an hour on this one. We have both the film's director, writer, historian, and animator. It's going to be a great conversation. For those of you who are not familiar with Freep Film Festival, it is the documentary film festival produced by the Detroit Free Press's newsroom. We've been around for 7 years. Unfortunately, this year we were not able to do our physical festival, so we've been regularly involved in virtual conversations, both screenings of films and talking about them. And that is why we are here tonight. I'm not going to say much more. We have a great moderator lined up for you. Her name is Chanel Stitt. She wrote a really excellent story about this movie, which you can still read on freep.com, and that is where the movie itself is housed. So I'm going to get out of here, turn it over to Chanel and all our guests, and I hope that everyone enjoys this conversation, because that is what I'm going to sit back and do. Chanel, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chanel Stitt, and I am a Freep Now intern at the Detroit Free Press. I am very excited to introduce the creators of a short documentary titled Sarah Elizabeth Ray, Detroit's Other Rosa Parks, which is available for viewing on the Detroit Free Press website. The film is directed by Aaron Schillinger, animated by Bec Sloane, and features historian Desiree Cooper. This film is part of a larger film titled Pablo Boats, A Tale of Two Sisters, which is still in progress. We will also be taking audience questions throughout the discussion. So could each of you briefly introduce yourselves and your role in this film? We can start with Aaron.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. And it's an honor just to be able to connect with people, even if it's virtually, it means a lot. I'm Aaron, the director of the film.
Desiree?
Hi, I'm Desiree Cooper. I'm actually a former Free Press columnist, and I'm happy to be back home right now, even though it's virtually. And I want to thank the Free Film Festival for having this tonight. I wrote about this way back in the day about Sarah Elizabeth Ray in 2006. And I think we'll be getting into that story a little bit longer, but later, but I never quite forgot what I found out by doing that story. And Aaron walked into my life a couple years ago saying he was doing a film about it. And boy, he's got something really going. And so we're joined at the hip now to make sure the story gets out.
And Bec.
Hi, I'm Bec. Hard to follow that up, Desiree, but I designed the sets of the film for the animation sequences and the characters. So I did the stop motion animation.
Perfect. So I wanted to get into a little bit more detail about how you guys met, because I thought it was really interesting. So we'll start there.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of hard to find a beginning place, right? Because Sarah, she got kicked off the boat in 1945, and then here we are, and it's 2020. I found out about Sarah Elizabeth Ray because in 2015, I started working on a documentary on the two steamships, the SS Columbia and the St. Clair, also known as the Pablo boats. I'm originally from the East Coast. So I was living in New York City, and this nonprofit group called the SS Columbia Project reached out to me, and they needed some filming done. And I said, okay, I didn't really know anything about old boats, but I figured, why not? So I go out. They had the ship in the Toledo dry dock at the time, and they were spending millions of dollars to restore her hull, and I was kind of shocked to see the state she was in, because she was just falling apart. There were all of these holes. The paint was peeling off. And my first thought was like, why don't they just build a new boat? But that was foolish, because I started talking to people about the Columbia, and I heard so many memories. And then I found out that she had a sister ship named the St. Clair. And I didn't even know that ships could have sisters. So that really got me curious. And then I start talking to these people who are, I would say, kind of obsessed with the boats and also the island amusement park that they used to go to called Pablo Island. But the island closed in 1993, so I just didn't get it, you know? And I wanted to know more. So that was when I got bit by the Pablo bug back in 2015. And we just started following the restoration of these two ships, which are the oldest passenger excursion steamships in America. So I got a book on history written by Patrick Livingston, and there was about a page or two in this history book on Sarah Elizabeth Ray. And it talked about how she got kicked off the Pablo boat because she was the only African-American in her class of secretaries. They were going to a graduation, right? And she got kicked off, and then it talked about the case, and it said that the island closed afterwards, but it didn't really go into a lot of detail. And I looked online to try to find more information, but there really wasn't much until suddenly Desiree Cooper had an article online. And I'm like, and I read it, and I'm like, this woman actually met Sarah Elizabeth Ray, which I had not found anyone who had met her. And so that's how I met Desiree.
Perfect. And just tell me a little bit about the significance of the Pablo boats to Detroit's history.
Yeah. I never had the pleasure of going on the boats, but they're just a part of summer from all the stories that I've heard. You know, they closed in 1993, but they were in operation for 85 years, taking generations of Detroiters to an island amusement park, which is actually in Canada, it's an island called Bois Blanc. But Americans didn't know how to pronounce that, so they actually called it Pablo because they couldn't speak French. And it
they couldn't speak French.
Bois Blanc. And, you know, they served Faygo and Verner's on the boats and Kowalski hot dogs and Better Made potato chips. And it was accessible by public transportation. So you didn't have to have a ton of money to get to the park. You didn't have to have a car. And so it was a getaway for the people. Now, it wasn't always for everybody. And that's what this story about Sarah Elizabeth Ray is about. Because a lot of people have kind of forgotten that some people had to fight very hard to have the island available for people of all color.
I love that.
On some level, that's why we call it the Other Rosa Parks, because people do forget it was public transportation. It's like the parallels are crazy. You know, it's someone who sort of found themselves caught in a moment, and that moment ended up changing history. For Sarah Elizabeth Ray, it was getting kicked off the boat in front of her classmates that she had just graduated with. She was 24 years old. And the humiliation of that moment just wasn't sitting well with her. And she went right to the NAACP, and they ended up taking the case all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court. What was lucky is that Michigan has a civil rights statute. It was one of the few states that really barred discrimination in public accommodations. And so she won, I mean, hands down. It was like just with the letter of the law, it was no question. But the Pablo company refused to integrate and did shut down, and then they were sold, and then they opened. And, you know, so we've gone on our merry way. Meanwhile, Sarah Elizabeth Ray's case was a test case that Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP did to see what the Supreme Court's appetite was going to be for actually upturning society as it was structured in 1954. And because the Supreme Court, that same court, ruled in favor of Sarah Elizabeth Ray, then there was a feeling that they really could have a chance to take something that didn't just apply to Michigan, but applied to the United States. And that was a stepping stone to Brown versus Board of Education in 1954.
And so you actually had the opportunity to meet Sarah Elizabeth Ray. So tell me a little bit about what she said that experience was like for her, when she's the only Black person in her class and all of a sudden she's being kicked off the boat in front of all these people.
Well, by the time I found her, and I say I found her, but that's maybe not the right way. I was led to her by an attorney who called the Free Press and kept insisting that I get out immediately and go meet this woman, Sarah Elizabeth Ray. And I'm like, well, I've heard of Rosa Parks. Who's Sarah Elizabeth Ray? And he badgered me, frankly. And so I finally got off my butt and went to see what he was talking about. So I meet this very rail thin, very gaunt old woman who's living alone. It's February when I get to her house, and it's cold. The house is cold inside. I don't know if she was conserving heat or didn't have heat. She wanted to offer me something, and she said she didn't have anything. And I just had this overwhelming sense that she was a woman forgotten, completely forgotten. And then she tells me this story, and as she's telling it, I felt like she was still indignant. She was still angry about that moment. And that the insult never went away. In fact, she never rode the boat. And it's also interesting that I didn't either. I came to Detroit in 1984. I never managed to go to Pablo. So here we are, it's sort of like three people who never went there. And yet we all understand what that meant to Detroit. And for me, it was so interesting that by the time I got to Detroit, there was no conversation about how the boat used to be segregated. There was no conversation about what kind of fight there was for Black families to be able to have what Aaron really aptly described as sort of a common experience around Detroiters. You didn't even have to buy things. If you got on the boat, you could take your picnic lunch, so it was very accessible to people. And it's full of good memories, but this is a memory that we've forgotten.
Definitely. And just a reminder, we will be taking audience questions, but I wanted to know, Aaron, what drew you to wanting to tell this story? You had found it and came across it and then eventually met with Desiree. So what was the driving force of telling the story?
It was a powerful story. And it felt like no one had really done it before, So that's exciting as a documentary filmmaker to find something that you feel, you never know if it's going to resonate with people, but you have this feeling that it might. And I think it really came together when I met Bec. I saw one of her films playing actually in Lincoln Center in New York City. And I was just blown away by her technique because at that time, I didn't really have many pictures of Sarah. I'm not the best researcher. I've since learned because we have a researcher now whose name is also Sarah, who's dug up a lot of amazing stuff that we're still finding. And we want to share some of those pictures later. But at the time we made the animation, I only had a tiny little grainy photo of her. And I'm so thankful that Bec, who's with us right now, was able to kind of breathe life into Sarah's story.
Definitely. And we can go to Bec right now. Tell me the most important thing that you were trying to convey with the animations, and tell us what type of platform that you used to create the animations.
Sure. Well, one of the main reasons I like to kind of promote using this medium is because there are a lot of untold stories out there, and a lot of them are about people that there might not be documentation of, there might not be photos, and those histories get erased because we're a culture that we need to see these references. We need to, see a movie made about it or a biography or something. And so, especially in the beginning when we didn't have any pictures of her, but I still want us to be able to tell her story, maybe not from her voice, but to show her experiencing it as she did at the time. So, and as a production designer, I tried to recreate that world, the 1940s, Detroit, and give it a kind of a tone. It wasn't in black and white, but it had a tone to it that kind of made it like a nostalgia, like a memory, because I think the whole Pablo film is about memory, but I think that this one is about, the tone and the feel of her particular story. And the medium I use a lot of people think it's claymation, but it's stop motion animation, and it's the way I do it is there's wire in the characters so they can move all their fingers and their heads and express themselves. But the skin, the clothes, everything else is made of fabric, and I use recycled textiles. So it's all things from our lives, like well, there she is right now. There's Sarah.
Yeah, I didn't want to fix for what you're saying, but
I just saw it on the screen like another body suddenly appearing. She's looking like she needs to do a little yoga, maybe. She's a little stiff.
Yeah, a little bit. Sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's easier to demonstrate. Unfortunately, I don't have my things around me right now, but yeah, I use this material not just because it's my chosen aesthetic, but because I think people connect when they can see something tactile, something like from their world, something familiar. So if it's, CGI or a cartoon, it's a little more, you're more distant from it. And this kind of almost literally puts you in someone else's shoes. It puts you in, feeling the moment and building the character that way. So.
It's a work of art within a work of art. I mean, it's really, the look is great. And a lot of people are surprised when you say you're doing a documentary about a historical figure, and it's not like the Ken Burns,
slow zoom on a photo.
And that it looks like puppets, and I was just completely blown away by that, because I was drawn in, and immediately I thought how this will have cross appeal generationally. That the design of it really brings you in no matter what age you are. It doesn't feel like cold newsprint or newsreel, and it's very warm. It's very beautiful. And I don't know how Aaron, you guys said how long did it take you to actually, so it's a 4-minute segment for people that don't know. It's 4 minutes. So how long did it take you to do the stop animation?
Well, it might be a 4-minute film, 4.5-minute film, but the actual amount of stop motion shots in it, I think only add up to 2.5 minutes. But that means how many frames a second, Bec? Do you want to take it over?
Well, so yeah, when people ask how long will stop motion take, especially when it's like starting a new project, I tell them this is part of a bigger conversation, because there's a lot of questions, a lot of determining factors. And there's something known as the frame rate, which is how many pictures per 1 second that we have to take. So let's say if we're waving our arm, it's one picture, one picture, one picture, one picture. So it's all these little tiny movements. And since I really like it to not be too jarring and feel smooth and not interrupt the story, like really flow, I like it to be smooth, which means 24 frames per second. So that's 24 pictures per 1 second. And to give you a sense, I don't know the exact breakdown of what Pablo ended up being, but I worked on a stop motion film that was 15 minutes long once, and it took us over a year.
Oh my goodness.
And that's because it had, maybe 24 different sets, like settings, over 24 characters. I also worked on one that was 10 minutes long. It took 2 months. So there's a big range, but this one, we really wanted to feel immersed in the world. So like we had, like the boardwalk scene, we have all these background characters, because it really makes you feel like if you only see the one puppet, it might be a little too like, okay, this is like a puppet show. But when you have we played with like different depth perceptions and things like that. And we played with scale. So you feel like you're even more like looking across the whole city of Detroit. But we actually just made the size of the cars smaller and smaller as they're further away. So it really immerses you in the story, wow. I think.
Yeah, I didn't know any of those tricks, so I learned a lot. I think we were in the studio. There was also a cinematographer and lighting director who had a short film. Your other short film, by the way, Taylor Stanton, was in the Free Press Film Festival about a year or two. Yeah. Was that the likes and dislikes?
Yeah, that was the film I referenced earlier. That it was another documentary also done in stop motion, and I think that kind of played into why I think you knew Taylor to some degree before your film, and so that's why we kind of saw the connection of, you can use this medium to help tell a story that you might not have footage from.
Yeah, one thing that really drew me to it also is the fact that you make all this by hand, and to tell the story of someone who was, quote unquote, forgotten. It's just such a loving tribute to spend so much time in a small cramped studio, even after you've made everything, to bring it back to life. So I think I'm just really grateful for that. Yeah.
It was a great story to be part of. So.
So, Aaron, you do have some photos of Sarah, even though her information is like really scarce. So, if you could like pull those up so we can look at them and kind of like go through her life story a little bit.
Yeah. So this is a story. This is a picture of a story that our researcher Sarah found, and we don't know where this picture was taken. We're still trying to figure out. But it's such a heroic power stance that Sarah Elizabeth Ray is taking here. And actually, at this time, she had already gotten married, so her last name, she changed it to Haskell, and she started going by her middle name, Elizabeth, but she shortened it to Liz, but she added a Z at the end. So that all made it very hard to track down this woman who's now going by Liz Haskell, Lizz Haskell. But that's who this woman is, you know. And this is the newspaper article that Desiree originally wrote back in 2006.
Nice.
And so that's the woman I met, not that woman.
That's a young Desiree, fierceless reporter right there.
2006 was a long time ago, as you can see. But yeah, Sarah, that's her. I mean, when I look back at that, it kind of takes my breath away because it just takes me back to that moment where we were together. And then she died later in the year. That was February, and late summer in August, she passed away of that year.
And this is the story continued here. A wider shot of Sarah Elizabeth Ray in her house.
And that photo you see in the foreground is actually a painting that someone did of her husband, Raphael Haskell. And together, they were activists together. And a lot of their action was community building and supporting of the basic needs of people on the East Side. But she also had this underlying mission of peace between the races. You know, that was like just people getting along was hugely a part of what she was fighting for.
Nice.
Now, we still have a lot of research and work to do, but this is one of the photographs that our researcher was able to dig up. You can see her there with a little sassy attitude. I just love that smile that she has.
No, I got a few comments under my articles that said she kind of looked like Taraji P. Henson, and they want her to play her in another film. So I thought that was pretty funny to add too. So you guys wanted to release this story now. Why was it important to release it before you release the full film that you're building about the entire Pablo Boat story?
Right. So the longer film is called Pablo Boats: A Tale of Two Sisters, and it's narrated by Martha Reeves, and we've been working on it for a while. It should be done at the end of this year. But when George Floyd was murdered and people just started waking up once again to the police brutality against African Americans, I reached out to Desiree, and we both agreed that it was now we should share Sarah's story now, because it's a great way to show a success story of somebody who stood up for their rights. And, you know, all these protesters across the country, like, you know, Desiree has this beautiful line in the film where she talks about people chipping away to make change in the United States and across the world. And, you know, Sarah is one of those people that chipped, but maybe didn't get the recognition that a lot of other people got.
Yeah, and I'd also add, Aaron, that people are also realizing that they've been undereducated, miseducated. You know, black, white, indifferent people are saying, what did I miss? Like, I never knew that. You know, what else is out there that I never knew? So there's really an appetite for people to kind of rethink. I mean, rethink the Pablo experience and have way more context around what a privilege it was for Black families to go there. And how did that happen? And, you know, right now we are very much sort of a boycott nation, we're not going to have Aunt Jemima pancakes anymore because we don't like Aunt Jemima. We're not going to, shop here because they do this, that, the other. Where was that around the Pablo boat? It's just so interesting to me that was not a carryover. And in fact, I think that African Americans in general felt relief when they were able to go to places that were once prohibited. So rather than saying, forget it, I'm never going there, because if you treated me that way yesterday, what's difference is today? Instead, they said, well, I earned this, I deserve this, this is my right, and I'm going just like you did. So it's just kind of a very different perspective, and we like to make sure people have that context around the Pablo experience.
Definitely. And what do you hope that, people take away from this story? There's a lot of things that are going on right now, and there's a lot of things, of course, happened in the past. So what do you hope is the message that everyone takes from seeing this forgotten civil rights leader?
Well, a couple things, I guess. One is we really want to expand this into at least a 30-minute long film, because she's no longer going to be forgotten, but we want to know more about her as a person, and we want to know what she did after integrating the Pablo boats, when she founded the Action House, the community nonprofit organization that Desiree was talking about. But one line that Desiree says at the end of the film is that there's a lot of other people whose names we'll never know. Mm-hmm. And so that's just a humbling thing to think about, of like, I can feel good, I'm making this documentary and, sharing her story, but how many other documentaries have not been made? And how many people's stories will we not know? You drive around Detroit and you see a lot of abandoned houses, and it just makes you wonder, like, who were the families that lived there, and like, what are the stories that could be in those houses? So.
Yeah, I think that's actually, it plays into like this moment we're going through right now too, is just about saying people's names. Like, if we can't tell their whole story, or if we can't speak for everybody else out there that's not being spoken for, like the few that we know, we remind people that, like, okay, there might not be a book about them, or they might not be in our history books, but like, here's their name, know that they existed, and know that they're not the only one that didn't get their story told. So, and I think to speak to what Desiree was saying before, is that the culture has changed, and now people are less tolerant of things like that. People are speaking up now. There's this whole like cancel culture of boycotting and things like that. And I think there's more of a demand for telling the whole story. Like, sure, there were Pablo boats in the history books, where like, I mean, these events were known about, but not the whole picture, not the darker side of things. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to have to rewrite a lot of the history books after, these past few years. So, and I think even young people are, like students are demanding to know the whole truth. So.
And one thing we would love is that if there are people out there who knew Liz Haskell, or who went to the Action House as kids, and who remember getting those free lunches and remember the support that their family got. I mean, we'd love to hear from people. We'd love to get more source material so that we can expand the conversation about her story. And, I think the more we participate as Detroiters in recovering our own history, I think the better the end story that we get to tell, the more authentic it will be. And you guys can help us by supporting it financially. This costs money, and right now it's a labor of love. Aaron is going to talk more about that.
Yes, I do have some more photos I can share, but before that, I'll say it now, and we'll make sure to repeat it. If you go to our website, otherrosaparks.com, or Detroit's Other Rosa Parks, we made it very easy for you. There's a link to our GoFundMe. And there, we talk about, we want to make a 30-minute film, but also an interactive website, because in this time where everyone's separate, we want a way to help people interact with these articles and documents and pictures that we're finding from Sarah's life. Did you want to do a little more screen share?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. So that's where we left off. This is a picture that we had restored of Sarah in the middle, and then the gentleman in the plaid shirt, we're pretty sure is her husband, Raphael Haskell. The gentleman in the white shirt we're not sure, but I like to think that it's Raphael's father. And so you can see what the condition that we found the photo in. It looks beautiful in its own way, but it's nice to be able to see with kind of clarity. It kind of brings you back a little bit more. And I just want to reiterate that we didn't have any of these photos back when we first made that animation. So this is all really recent stuff here. You can see Sarah there kind of sitting with her legs out to the side. And this, I have to zoom out a little bit. Actually, I can't get the date to display, but this is May of 1968. And our researcher figured out that this was taken in DC after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Wow. And so very powerful place and time that we can pinpoint her story to. And this is all a cover page of sorts of the court case that Desiree was talking about. The actual name of the court case was the Pablo Excursion Company versus the people of the state of Michigan. So this is when the case had already been to the local Detroit courts, and then it went to the state court. So this is when her case went to the Supreme Court, where Thurgood Marshall was her lawyer. And you can actually read the entire transcript online if you just Google it. It's very interesting that all this is available. And I wonder if anyone in the audience might know who is in this photo with Sarah. So Sarah's on the right, not the one smoking the cigarette. But in one of our last screenings, we actually, somebody in the audience chimed in and told us that this was Odette, the famous singer. And that just really blew us away. She was also a civil rights activist, very involved in the 60s and 70s. And it just makes us ask so many other questions. Like, what else don't we know about Sarah Elizabeth Ray? We know she was friends with Coleman Young. We learned that recently.
And also, it's sort of coming to light that she was a creative person. Like, she wrote poetry, and I think she was musical. At least she sang. There's some indication of that. So she's a woman of many talents.
Yeah. This just looks like she's dressed up, and I just imagine, her husband, Raphael, or maybe it was an artsy photographer that she knew that just wanted to like grab a picture of her, when she was all dressed up. But I do love this photo. And this is the last picture that I have prepared to share tonight. This is an article from 1974. And you can see here, I'll zoom in. This is.
I don't think we can view it.
Oh, you guys are having trouble seeing it?
Well, I still see the previous photo of when she was dressed up.
Okay, so what are you seeing now? The dressed up photo again?
Yeah.
And what about now?
Now I see it.
Okay, yes. Thanks for letting me know.
You're welcome.
So you can see here, this is a photo where she's identified as Liz Haskell. I'll just zoom way in because why not, right? And there's also an interesting quote here that kind of breaks my heart. I love it, but it kind of breaks my heart. Liz Haskell, who says she added the extra Z to her name, quote, "so they'll never forget me." So nobody has. I mean, we haven't now, right? Nobody's ever forgotten. There's always going to be somebody. It feels weird to say, the forgotten civil rights activist, because there's always somebody who's going to remember. But yeah. So again, if anyone knows about, happen to have met Liz Haskell or went to the Action House, we'd love to hear your stories. And the Free Press is a great way to reach out to the city of Detroit. So we're very happy to be here.
And so we do have an audience question. A viewer asked why Sarah Elizabeth Ray never ended up riding the boat.
She was pissed off. And she basically, like I said, when I saw her just months before her death, she was still mad about it. So it was her dignity. You know, if they treated her that way, there's no way she was ever going to step foot on that boat.
And so we talked so much about it being a forgotten story. Why is it important to not forget these types of stories? And why is it important to actively search for forgotten stories?
Well, history is important because we can learn from it. I mean, most obviously. And I think, you know, one thing that we kind of have been getting a little bit on social media is some people just wanted to remember Pablo as this fun, happy place, you know, but that's not the whole reality. And people have failed to kind of keep that in mind, that it wasn't always fun and happy, you know. There were, you know, blacks were only allowed to go on a Monday. And that was the case for amusement parks all over the country. And you just don't think about that. It's like, wow, like that was, things weren't always this easy to be able to get in a car and go to Six Flags. You know, not everybody could do that. And so I just think we're also so thirsty for stories of forgotten people because I don't know. People just want to learn, I think.
I think that's true. And I also think that it helps write a narrative that has been leaning one way or another. You know, you sometimes hear people say, like, why didn't the slaves just want to run away? Do you have the stories of the countless of slaves that ran away? Like, we don't have their stories. You know, that's not what happened. There were rebellions all the time, and there were different ways of fighting back. So this is kind of like that, you know. It's filling in a narrative about who people are and what their experience has been in America as Americans, and that's something we need to understand with a larger context. You know, one person has been asking, like, what did her classmates do, like when they came to kick her off the boat? Well, I mean, that's another very sad, something that just kind of makes me choke up a little. It's like her teacher even said, oh, she'll go quietly, you know, like, we're getting on this boat and we're going to have a great time and we're going to celebrate our graduation, and she's not going to ruin it for us. Like, we did our best. We tried to get her on. It's not working. See ya when we get back. So, I mean, just imagine that, you know, she was sat beside them for however long it took to get equal the certificate that they had. You know, how do you just in 1 second be not worthy of sitting beside them on a boat? It's bizarre. You really have to contort your mind to construct a world like that. And you really are contorted to live in that world. And that's something that I think that Bec really brings to life through the puppets. I mean, that scene is really a great scene. And it is done through the stop animation and the puppets. It's not narration, you know, me talking or someone else talking. Like, we see her and what they did, and it's powerful.
Well, I think when you talk about how it's difficult for people to wrap their head around, like, how could the teacher encourage that, or how could the other students just look away? I think all of this plays into like these like inconvenient truths, and people want to continue thinking the way that they've always thought because that's easier. It's what we've always learned, and it's very challenging to suddenly restructure everything you've ever known. But if we do want the truth, we're going to have to do that, and that includes telling these stories that don't necessarily shine a nice light on everyone. So you have to interrupt the narrative that you were talking about, this like dominant narrative, because history was written by the winners, and you know, we need to start shaking it up a little bit. So
definitely. We have more audience questions, so keep them coming. Another viewer asked if Aaron has any other forgotten stories that you're currently researching right now that could possibly end up in a film.
None like this. This is a really powerful story that I just feel very fortunate to be able to be a part of.
Definitely. And we have another question. Did Sarah Elizabeth Ray ever connect or work with any other Detroit's best known activists?
Yeah, I actually just started doing some interviews this week with people who remember her as an East Side activist and some of the other groups that she worked with. People were asking about the Bog Center. I'm not sure if she connected with them. She may have, and I will certainly track that down. But she was involved with New Detroit, which is an organization that I actually worked with when I first came to Detroit. There are also like Franklin Wright settlements and some East Side inner city subcenter. There were other groups. Action House is kind of credited with being one of the first on the East Side, from what I understand, but not the only by far. And she was pretty strident, from what I understand, amongst them. You know, she let her will be known, let people understand what her people in her organization needed. And she was a tough cookie when it came to speaking truth to power. Like, she was not a shy person.
And so overall, what can we expect to see in the upcoming film just about the Pablo boats?
Well, the Pablo Boat's A Tale of Two Sisters, like I mentioned earlier, it's narrated by Martha Reeves. And it's like a fairy tale about Detroit told by a steamboat. So Martha Reeves is playing the voice of SS Columbia. And she's worried about her younger sister, Claire, because the two boats were separated in 2015. Columbia moved to New York and Buffalo, and St. Clair was left in Detroit, where if people were watching the news in 2015, she's had a bumpy ride. And the film follows a doctor.
Because it caught fire, right? Oh.
Spoiler.
Can you guys erase that? I'm sorry.
No. It doesn't matter, because you know, a good movie, which hopefully this is, you could know the end of the movie, but it's the journey of watching it.
There we go. Absolutely.
But the film follows this kind of ragtag group of people, a doctor who owns the boat, and a Pablo Island fanatic who's his right-hand man, and a psychic who's also connected to the boat. She actually speaks with the SS Columbia. And so the film follows them closely as they're trying to preserve the vessels, but it also takes some dives into history. And so we learn about segregation in amusement parks and how that actually contributed to Pablo Island closing down. And, you know, you can't tell a story about Detroit without talking about race. And so that's where Sarah's story definitely comes in, and some of this other Detroit history.
Definitely. And we have another audience question. A viewer wonders, when did they ultimately welcome Blacks on board of the boats?
Well, our understanding is that the court case was, you know, Sarah and Thurgood won the court case in 1948. And rather than integrate, the Pablo Excursion Company actually just shut down because they did not want to let blacks into Pablo, because they felt like it would tarnish their park. So they were like, they didn't even want to try. So they were just done with it. And it wasn't until the following year, I think 1950, I'm not exactly sure about that, when another company purchased the park. Mm-hmm. It could have been, yeah, Des, do you know if it was later in 49 or 50?
I don't know. It was around that time because the company bought it because they knew it was a moneymaker, and all they had to do was open it back up and people would come. But also, to be clear, you know, it was segregated. So what they opposed is blacks and whites being there at the same time. So they had colored days, Mondays. So after the weekend, and when they weren't going to make any money anyway, that's the day that black people could come onto the boat. So even when it was segregated, they had colored days, and that was pretty typical many, recreation amusement park places. And I also saw some comments, even some tonight, that they also had segregated staff. So there were some positions like the concessions or the ticket holders, takers were always white. And then the cleaning janitorial staff was always Black. So that's also quite typical, actually, of amusement parks across the nation. So Pablo, in this regard, they were part of the fabric of American society. I mean, that's why we had Idlewild Michigans and our own places to go where we were completely free to be who we were and didn't have to worry about segregation. I mean, we were free within segregation to do what we wanted to do as Black people. And that some of that was lost through integration, that those separate, wonderful places with memories were gone as Blacks then went to integrate places that they couldn't go before.
And so I know that you guys want to make an educational piece for people to use in classrooms and, further on that. So what can people do to help you guys make this an extended film? Should people reach out to you if they know any information? Like, how should people go about helping out?
Even though we're up to our elbows in new documents and photos, we still would love to talk to people who have met Sarah or know someone who met Sarah or might have a lead of somebody who knew Sarah. That would be really exciting. Also, financial support would be really key right now because, I can only ask people to volunteer so much before they stop picking up the phone. And so if you go to our website, Detroit'sOtherRosaParks.com, you'll see a link and you just click the link and go to the GoFundMe and you can check us out and let us know what you think, or you can donate as well. It goes for a website. We also want to partner with local organizations, nonprofit organizations, so we can make this video available to them. And we even have a stretch goal. If we're able to meet our $25,000, we have someone in our team, our researchers, very passionate about putting up a mural on Detroit's East Side, which would be just a wonderful way that, people could connect with her.
And at the website, you can also leave your contact information and messages for us. That's the best way.
And I'll add, one more thing. If you can't donate now, but you want to know more about Sarah, because we are going to have some new things come up with this research, at the bottom of the website, just enter your email address and we'll email you like maybe once a month or something like that with some new stuff, just to keep you updated, because we want to make sure that everyone can know about Sarah, even if you can't afford to donate some money at this time. Yeah.
Perfect. And are there any parting words that you want to leave with the audience?
I just feel really thankful that we're living in the time that we are now, where people want to hear these stories. And I'm thankful. I didn't get to meet Sarah, but I feel like I'm starting to kind of understand the world that she moved around in. And I'm thankful to be here with the Freep and my collaborators here. And, thank you, Chanel, too. You've done a great job.
Thanks.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, what better place for a story like this to come from than Detroit? This is not only a local story, it is a national story. Sarah Elizabeth Ray changed American history because her case chipped away at Separate but Equal and made Brown versus Board a reality. So, once again, we're quietly in the background when we should be yelling in the foreground about what an amazing group of people Detroiters really are. And so I'm thrilled. I'm just so thrilled to be a part of this. And I hope you guys just jump on board, man, and let's get this rolling. Let's make sure people know this story.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining me this evening and for sharing your story with the audience and how this all came together. For the audience, make sure that you check out the film. If you haven't yet, it's on the Detroit Free Press website, and we will see you. Good night.
Hi, thank you.